The 2024 IMSA season kicks off at the most important event on the calendar, which is the Rolex 24 at Daytona. But before the event gets underway, there are definitely some important facts that you need to know about this historic Daytona endurance race. And so that's why I've collaborated with IMSA YouTuber Off in the Esses, so we can bring you 5 things you need to know about the Rolex 24 in 2024. Here's something cool to know. Rexy is back for 2024. Our favorite dinosaur Porsche is returning to IMSA this season. And for the very first time at the Rolex 24, AO Racing is putting the Rexy livery on their Porsche entry. The team AO Racing first put the Rexy livery on the Porsche GT3R at the 12 Hours of Sebring in 2023. And because of how popular it's become with the fans, AO Racing has stuck the livery on ever since. For the Rolex 24, Rexy will be piloted by Sebastian Priaulx, Lauren Heinrich, and exclusively for Daytona, Michael Christensen, the driver of the number 5 Porsche Penske 963 in the WEC. AO Racing and their Rexy entry will also jump from GTD, where they raced in 2023, to GTD Pro, meaning Rexy will have red highlights for the Pro colors. So far, AO Racing have had the perfect start with Rexy to the Rolex 24, as Sebastian Priaulx put this number 77 Porsche 911 GT3R on pole position in the GTD Pro class, and Rexy will front the field at Daytona when the lights go green for the 24-hour endurance race. And while we're already on the subject of AO Racing, the Rexy Porsche is not the only car that is racing for them at Daytona, because AO Racing is also participating in the LMP2 class, racing an Oreca 07 with a purple dragon livery, which they've called Spike.
Alright, so we go from one green car in Rexy to another in the Lamborghini SC63. Unlike Rexy though, the SC63 will not be present at this year's Rolex 24. The car, which was unveiled to the world last summer, was scheduled for a 2024 debut in IMSA and the WEC. The car, which is built on the Ligier chassis, has been doing plenty of testing in the United States, having most recently run in the multi-day IMSA-sanctioned test at Daytona, and they followed that up immediately after with a test of their own at COTA. So you might be wondering, if this car has been testing so much, why won't it be in the race? Well, Lamborghini has never confirmed publicly the official reasoning for why the SC63 will miss the Rolex 24, but we can look back at some quotes and some other events that have taken place that have ultimately led to them not being on the Rolex grid. Back in July when the car was unveiled, Lamborghini Motorsports head Giorgio Sanna was quoted by SportsCar365 as saying, "We will do what's needed in terms of the homologation process and to also collect as much data as possible. But then today, to say that we'd be ready to do Daytona is too early. At the moment, it's not planned to do the Rolex 24. So things were even in doubt back then. It seems like the critical sort of turning point in all of this, when it became pretty clear that they weren't going to be able to make the Rolex 24, was when the car was involved in a testing accident back in August. The accident, which took place at Paul Ricard, caused the chassis to be considered a write-off, and was a big bump in the road for their testing schedule. Now, they still had a second chassis to be able to complete testing, but of course you're going to be a lot more limited in what you can do in testing with a single chassis versus having 2. Plus, you also still had to have one left to be able to homologate the car with. Now yes, the SC63 will miss IMSA season opener, the Rolex 24, but it is still expected to be at the WEC season opener at Qatar. And then after making its WEC debut, it will make its IMSA debut at the second round of the season, the 12 Hours of Sebring. Now speaking of the WEC, are we going to see any LMH cars on the grid this year, Jonah?
Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. Alongside Lamborghini's SC63 not competing, not a single Le Mans hypercar will be on the grid for this year's edition of the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Every GTP entry entered for the Rolex 24 this year is a car built around the LMDH regulations, meaning that cars such as the Ferrari 499P or Peugeot 9X8 hypercar, for example, are nowhere to be seen on this grid. So I suppose you're probably asking yourself the question, why? Why are the LMH prototypes not apparent on the Rolex 24 grid this year? Well, across my many years of research on this topic, I've narrowed it down to 3 reasons. 1 is that the manufacturer doesn't have enough resources, 2 is that they simply do not want to race in the IMSA GTP category, and 3 is that they are not allowed to race in this category. To be clear, LMH cars are allowed to race in IMSA's GTP class. They just haven't come over yet. Out of all the manufacturers that have built LMH cars, there are 4 car brands that are eligible to race at the Rolex 24. These brands include Toyota, Ferrari, Peugeot, and Aston Martin. 3 of the 4 car brands mentioned have expressed very little interest in joining the Rolex 24 with their hypercars. They seem to be focusing the majority of their attention on the WEC hypercar class and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. As for the other car brands that have built Le Mans hypercars, they simply are not allowed to race. This is because of IMSA's strict rule, which states 2,500 road cars must be produced per year in order for a manufacturer to be able to compete. The manufacturers that this rule affects include Glickenhaus, Vanwall, and Isotta Fraschini. So even if they were interested in joining the GTP class, and by the way, a few years ago Glickenhaus was, they simply would not be eligible to race at the Rolex 24. However, there is good news for IMSA fans that want to see Le Mans hypercars run in GTP. Because remember when I said 3 of the 4 eligible manufacturers didn't want to race in IMSA's GTP class? Well, one of those car brands was interested. Aston Martin recently confirmed that they will be entering IMSA's GTP class in 2025, with GT customer team Heart of Racing running a V12 Valkyrie LMH. So unfortunately, no Le Mans hypercars on the grid this year, but Aston Martin's LMH should make its debut at the Rolex 24 in 2025. Now, let me hand things back over to Stu.
Well, we might not be seeing any LMH cars in this year's Rolex 24, but we are going to be seeing double duty from one of the best bronze-rated drivers in the world. Ben Keating is set to run in both the GTP and LMP2 classes at this year's Rolex, and he's no stranger to doing so. In 2022, he ran with JDC Miller Motorsports in DPI and PR1 Matheson Motorsports in LMP2. In 2021, he did it with PR1 in LMP2 and TF Sport in GTD. In 2020, he ran with PR1 Matheson Motorsports in LMP2 and Riley Motorsports in GTD. In 2017, he competed in the Prototype Challenge class with Starworks Motorsports and in GTD with Riley Motorsports. Oh yes, there's more. In 2016, he raced in 2 GTD entries, the number 93 and the number 33 Riley Motorsports Vipers. He did the same thing in 2015, racing in 2 Riley Motorsports Vipers. And in 2012, he raced in 2 Racers Group GT Porsches. Yeah, okay, that's quite the resume of pulling double duty in this race. Well done, Ben Keating. But what makes this year's double duty special is that he's going to be doing it in the GTP class. In doing so, Ben will become the first bronze driver to compete in the GTP class since it was introduced last year. And in the GTP class, he's going to be running once again with JDC Miller Motorsports, who, as I mentioned just a second ago, he raced with in the DPI class. Alright, so it's going to be his first time running with the Porsche 963. But his second ride is one that he's much more familiar with. In fact, he's a 2-time series champion in the Oreca 07, and this year with United Autosports, he will be seeking his 3rd championship. Ben certainly is an impressive driver, and you love to see him take on a challenge like this. He'll be certainly one to keep an eye on in this race, and see if he can grab another one of those iconic Rolex watches. Back over to you, Jonah.
Thanks, Stu. It's going to be really exciting to see Ben Keating in both GTP and LMP2 at the Rolex. And let's now continue the subject of drivers participating at this historic event. Because did you know there are a lot of drivers that have participated in both Formula 1 and Indycar racing in this event in 2024? Well, let's go over each of these drivers. In the GTP class, in the 01 Chip Ganassi Cadillac, it's Sebastian Bourdais, a former IndyCar and F1 driver. Also in the car is Scott Dixon, a current IndyCar driver and one of the most successful Indy racers at that. He's a 6-time champion of the sport. Joining Bourdais and Dixon in the 01 Cadillac is Alex Palou, a current IndyCar driver and a two-time champion of the series. He's also the most recent champion of the IndyCar Championship. Moving on to Tom Blomqvist, a driver of the number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac. He is a current IndyCar driver. Also in the 31 Cadillac is Jack Aiken, a driver who's previously raced in Formula 1 as a stand-in at Williams at the 2020 Secure Grand Prix, while George Russell was lent off to Mercedes for that race specifically. Then there's the number 7 Porsche Penske. Former F1 driver with Sauber Felipe Nasr is in the car, and also joining him is Joseph Newgarden, a current IndyCar driver and two-time champion of the sport like Alex Palou. He is also the most recent Indy 500 champion. Then there's Wayne Taylor Racing. Two of the drivers driving the number 10 Acura are both former F1 drivers. Marcus Ericsson is one of them, and the other is Brendan Hartley. Marcus Ericsson is also an IndyCar driver, and won the 2022 Indy 500. Then in the second car, the number 40, Colton Herta is joining. He is a Californian IndyCar driver, and former F1 driver Jenson Button is also in the car. Button was also crowned Formula 1 World Champion in 2009. Moving on to past or present Formula 1 or IndyCar drivers racing at Daytona in the LMP2 class. First up is Pato O'Ward in the number 2 United Autosport Oreca 07. Pato is a current IndyCar driver and has won multiple races in the championship. Then returning to Daytona is Scott McLaughlin. Once again, he is driving the number 8 Tower Motorsport LMP2. McLaughlin is a current IndyCar driver and has also won races like O'Ward. Another IndyCar driver on the grid is Felix Rosenqvist. Rosenqvist is going to be in the same team as his former IndyCar teammate Pato O'Ward, but just in a different car. The Swedish racer will be driving the number 22 United Autosport LMP2. Also in the 22 United entry is former Force India Formula 1 driver Paul di Resta, who also races in the WEC with Peugeot Sport. Another F1 driver on the LMP2 grid is Felipe Massa. The Brazilian driver has raced for F1 teams such as Ferrari and Williams. Massa has secured many race wins in his F1 career, and will be driving the number 74 Riley LMP2 at Daytona. And finally, to complete the list of LMP2 drivers is Kyffin Simpson. Simpson is currently racing for Chip Ganassi Racing in the IndyCar Championship and will race the number 81 Dragon Speed LMP2 at the Rolex 24. Moving on to the F1 or IndyCar drivers racing in the GT classes at Daytona. Starting off with the GTD Pro class, and Pfaff Motorsports has signed James Hinchcliffe, a former IndyCar driver, to pilot their number 9 McLaren 720S GT3 Evo. Also in the car is going to be current IndyCar driver and former F1 driver Alexander Rossi. Rossi is also a former Indy 500 champion. Vassar Sullivan Lexus once again has two drivers that have raced in IndyCar. These racers include current IndyCar driver Kyle Kirkwood and former IndyCar driver Mike Conway. Romain Grosjean is also back for the Rolex 24. He is a former F1 driver and current IndyCar driver. He is racing with the Iron Lynx team in the GTD Pro class until the SC63 makes its debut at the 12 Hours of Sebring. And finally, GTD. And there are two drivers in this list. Both of them have raced in IndyCar. One of them is Tatiana Calderon, who will be driving the Acura NSX GT3 Evo for Gradient Racing. And Devlin DeFrancesco, who will be racing the Forte Racing Lamborghini Huracan GT3 Evo. So those are 5 facts you need to know about the Rolex 24 at Daytona in 2024. But before you go, I want to say that this is just part 1 of facts you need to know about the upcoming race at Daytona. Stu and I also collaborated on a video over on his channel, Off in the Esses. This is a super important video to watch, as this will dive into more facts that you need to know about the Rolex 24. You can check out this video right now by clicking the link to the left-hand side of your screen. But that pretty much concludes this video, and big thank you to Stu over at Off in the Esses for collaborating. So with that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.